The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I'm joined this week by just my bro host. How you doing, Shane?
I am doing great.
And this week we are talking about Tinykin. Tinykin is a 3D platformer with vaguely Pikmin-ish elements that came out last year. So this was one of the games that we wanted to cover during the year last year, but didn't get around to for various reasons. But over the holidays, this was something that I just put on the Xbox, on GamePass while I was sitting around with my daughter, and she thought it was really cute. And so we thought we'd talk about it this week.
Yeah, this was a really good game for just chilling out over the holidays. I did a little bit of playing it about the same time you did, I think. But I've been bouncing around with this for a while since it hit Game Pass. It's a game that right now, pretty regularly, my son is asking to watch me play. So he's loving it.
That's awesome. Yeah, my daughter too. The big hit for her on Game Pass has been the Peppa Pig game.
I watched her play that. That's so funny.
It is really, it's just absolutely gobsmackingly boring, and Daddy Pig continues to be just an offensive presence in the universe, and I hate Peppa Pig with serious passion. But it's a game that my daughter can control all by herself, and that's pretty cool. So it's been neat to see her play around with that. But her maximum session length with that is about 30 minutes, and then she starts wanting me to control Peppa Pig. She'll she'll mess around with it until she gets a little frustrated. I'm like, no, Peppa Pig's your thing, kid. That's not a daddy game. But Tinykin is a daddy game, and it's on Game Pass. I picked it mainly because Game Pass actually doesn't have a ton of totally non-violent games. There's
not a ton of that in general, I would say.
Yeah. It's tricky. If you want to play a game with a 4-year-old in your lap, it's hard to find something that is, more engaging than Peppa Pig and less violent than, I don't know, half of the stuff on Game Pass that is really about guns or what have you. And it's not that I have any issues with that. It's just, it's just a weird vibe to play. I don't play violent video games in front of my kids, at least not yet. That's just not a bridge I've crossed. But Tinykin is so cute.
I do. My son is bloodthirsty.
I've seen your son egg you on about Elden Ring. It's so funny.
Yeah. He's like, Daddy, don't you want to play Elden Ring? And so he's still, sidebar here. He really likes, if it is not a 2-player game, because he and I started playing games with stuff like, 2-player, the recent Mario games or Kirby. If I'm playing a game that doesn't have a second player in it, he'll look for some character and he's like, which one should I be? And he'll just kind of dance around the TV and egg me on, pretending to be that character. And Elden Ring has these summons, right? So I showed him all the summons. There are these ghost ashes that you can summon these ghosts in different places. And so Ty has decided that his character in Elden Ring is Lutel the Headless. Lutel the Headless.
I gotta Google a picture of Lutel the Headless.
Lutel the Headless is a mausoleum knight, which means that they kind of lurk around these giant walking mausoleums. Lutel the Headless is one of them. I'm glad Ty chose Lutel, because Lutel is a super useful summon, because Lutel has a teleport and is really good for kind of kiting bosses around. Lutel has
just like Ty.
Yeah, has a spear that's on fire, which is pretty sweet. Mm-hmm. So a teleporting character with a ranged attack, really useful as a buddy in the boss fights. So good choice, Ty. 5-year-olds know their stuff when it comes to Elden Ring.
I'm glad he can be of assistance. That's great.
Yes. So there you have it. My son, Lutel the Headless.
Well, well, and my daughter Peppa Pig, or actually Peppa Pig's friend. The game has this incredibly cute character incredibly cute is overdoing it because the Peppa Pig art style is kind of repellent, but it has a pretty solid little character creator where a kid can create a little friend to visit Peppa Pig, and that's who you're controlling in the game. And my daughter hates that. She keeps going back to it and creating like new friends and then deciding that the friend she has created is garbage and wants to make a new one, but that means resetting the save game. So we've started that game over several times. Fortunately, it doesn't matter because the game is just a collection of random events that happen when you wander around. But yeah, playing games with kids. Tinykin. Tinykin is a game in the kind of expanding little subgenre of you're a little tiny guy in an area of big people stuff. And this is like one of my favorite tropes in all of anything, borrowers type of stuff, the like little tiny dude in a big world. In some ways, like the early game or early level stuff in like Katamari Damacy has this kind of charm. The like I am a tiny person and exploring a regular sized person's space as if everything is huge and I have to takes a lot of effort to jump up onto a couch, for example. That's what really drew me to Tinykin. The other big sort of hook here is that it is a game about manipulating little tinier dudes, the Tinykin themselves, in a way that is very reminiscent of the Pikmin series. I'm not really into Pikmin. So this game, actually, I held off on playing it for quite a while because it's a 3D platformer and I'm usually allergic. And it's a game that's largely based on Pikmin, and I don't really dig Pikmin. I played a good amount of the one on the Wii U, but never finished it. Otherwise, I'm just not really into. I haven't played a ton of other Pikmin games. What I have played of them, I never really jived with that much. I played the one on Wii U because it was on the Wii U and I had one. So
I downloaded the demo for Pikmin 3, which I think is the Wii U one.
But it was ported to Switch.
Yeah, it's ported to Switch. So I downloaded the demo of that because I was, after a few successes, I was like, what other Nintendo games is Ty going to be really into? We weren't really into Pikmin. We played a few levels of it. The problem with it as a multiplayer game is how we wanted to play it is, the split screen element didn't really work that well for him, and the controls are pretty complicated for what it is. But it's funny because when I showed him Tinykin, he's like, "Oh, this is just like Pikmin." And
he remembered it.
You're right. You're 100% right, kid. This is exactly like Pikmin, but in my opinion, better in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that I think I liked it better than Pikmin. Pikmin had a lot less of the platforming. The platforming here actually worked for me in a way that was really surprising. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I think it really ties into the fact that this game has an incredible setting. This house, this 90s house that is just at a massive scale. So that really was what made this game. In fact, actually, I forgot to do our segment. Here we are, only the third instance of me trying to insert a banter segment into the show and force it on everyone, despite everyone's objections. And here I am forgetting it until 10 minutes in.
I object.
What am I doing? So Shane, in honor of the fact that this game is set in an alternate 90s or current 90s, it is set in a house in the 1990s.
Space 90s.
I wanted to ask you a question. What element of this is the segment Raygan that has no name? Raygan asks a vaguely video game related question at the top of the show to encourage banter or enforce banter.
I think we could call the segment Raygan's Natural Conversations.
Yes, Raygan has perfectly natural ways of inserting these sorts of things into
easy breezy
this particular episode, because it's just the two of us. I really didn't feel like it needed it, but I feel like also I've set myself up where if I skip it now, I'm surrendering. So I have to do this. So the question that I prepared in advance, because that's very natural, is what element of gaming from the 90s would you bring back today?
I would bring back same screen co-op. That was something that was really common. I know it still exists. It's just not as common as it was in the 90s. The 90s was like an era of the like character platformer, and you know your Sonic and Tails. Like they just put out a brand new Sonic game, no Tails as a, you know, you can't same screen co-op with Tails in that, which means that I'm probably not going to be, you know, popping it on for some co-op with the kiddo. And I just think that's an element of games that's a little bit lacking today. I know it exists, and we have had some great examples of it, but it's really only whet my appetite for it. And it still feels like something that is a little uncommon, and would be like a very welcome addition to a lot of different games that are coming out. I can think of like a lot of games that we played in this past year where I was like, they could just have a second guy on the screen. Can you imagine like Vampire Survivors with a second guy?
Honestly, yeah, that would work.
Yeah, can you imagine? I don't know, what other games can you imagine that we've played recently that would benefit from a second guy?
Let's see.
This game would
this
work
game
pretty
would
well.
probably work okay with a second guy.
Tinykin would be great with a Tails in there.
Yeah, maybe just give him a slightly different power set. Maybe he can't. Maybe you know, second guy can't throw the Tinykin, but he has, I don't know, a jetpack or something a little different than the bubble. Like, I don't know. Yeah, something like that.
To me, like the ideal is a Tails, and the thing that was so good about Tails is he was the little brother character. Like,
yeah,
authentically, he behaves like a little brother to Sonic, but the character is designed for the little brother to play. So you know, his powers are similar, but he has some abilities like the flying that help him kind of recover. He's good at helping the main character get to hard to reach places, and he is good for experimenting and collecting things. And you know, you don't have a individual life pool. Tails always comes back, you know, if you get smushed or run off the screen.
That's key, I think, for like a little brother or, you know, kid in your lap type of character. Like, I think my answer was going to be illustrated strategy guides. I actually was thinking about it a little bit when I was playing through this,
totally,
because there were some levels where I was, you know, a little bit stuck, and looking for how do I get to, you know, what like there's this game, each zone, each room or whatever usually has a number of objects you need to find and collect as part of, you know, progressing the story.
Now, do you mean strategy guides or like the pack-in manual?
Well, I'm thinking more of the like illustrated strategy guide specifically. So like, as opposed to, you know, what I have to do today if I get really stuck on a game is usually I have to first I try a Google search, and sometimes there are these, you know, websites like Polygon or what have you that have these content farmed articles where they're like, here's where to find the, you know, headless summon in Elden Ring or whatever, for SEO purposes. And, you know, fair enough. Those are great. Those are useful. But if that doesn't exist, or if you don't want to just do the Google searching thing, the other way to do it is like, you know, videos. You have to skim through a video. Neither of those is really what I want. What I miss is like you'd have a book, and you'd open that book, and, you know, I'm on page 3 of the book or 12 of the book or whatever, and here's some screenshots of the game. Here's some illustrations or cool art or whatever that they happen to scrounge together. Here's somebody's hand-drawn map. What I miss is the feeling of like everything I need is right here in a book. And maybe the book doesn't have to be an actual book, but like it never feels like there's like one place you can go for that stuff to quickly find what you're interested in. And also visuals. Like, you know, I've done the game facts thing, but you have to be able to translate between text and what's, you know, your experience in the game. And if things don't have like proper names, like where do I find the X or Y thing, and you don't know the specific name that's used for it, it's very hard to Google for things. It's very hard to find something in a game fact. I really miss the visuals of a actual printed strategy guide, especially illustrated or even hand illustrated. I love that. So that would be what I would bring back. It's hard. I don't know what form you could bring that back in today that would make financial sense. Nobody wants to buy a $40 book.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of want to jump off of that a little bit. There was a book that we had as kids that was I think it was called something like Blockbuster Secret Codes 98. and it was a big full out. It looked like a phone book, and it basically was just an index of all the cheat codes for all the games at Blockbuster, and they would just sell it by the register. And what an what an item that was. I mean,
I missed that actually. Yeah, no, this is sort of like, tips and tricks. Here's a book with all the cheat codes for all the games, kind of thing. Were kind of great back in their day too. But I always felt like they were kind of meh because there usually weren't any pictures. And they, with something like an RPG or whatever, it would be like, here's a code for infinite gil, but you wouldn't be like, where do I go next? I forgot what the king said. Like, it's kind of a different kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that was the early, the late 90s, early 2000s version of accessibility settings. By the way, every game was so ridiculously hard that they had to have those special cheat codes in there. This is a bit too much of a sidebar, sorry, but I recently was sitting down with our friend Michelle, and we were reminiscing, and then sat down to play the Lion King game from Genesis and SNES, and that is one of the most brutally difficult games.
Oh, I've gone back and played
ever.
that.
Yeah, that one. So there's the first level is already pretty punishing. The second level is the one based on I Can't Wait to Be King, and
the giraffe heads.
Yeah, so
the giraffe heads are brutal.
It's just ridiculous what a incredible level of precision they're asking of Lion King fans to get past level 2 in that game. It's a series of, I mean, there are like Maso core platformers today that could easily crib something from Roar at the Monkeys in that game. Anyway.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was. That was all. I mean, we're still on sidebar time here, but like that was all due to the rental market just being weird over here. It was different in Japan because they had made game rentals illegal. You couldn't rent video games according to their copyright law at the time that companies like Nintendo successfully lobbied for. Over here, the game companies were terrified that game rentals would completely eat their lunch on these games they were selling for $100 a cartridge back in the 90s. And maybe it would have, I don't know, but they would artificially inflate the difficulty of some of those early game levels for specifically that reason, to like be a meat wall for people renting the game to get them to buy it. And they really won against me, man. I never beat a game that I rented, never once. Kind of sucks in retrospect.
I barely beat any games that we owned.
Yeah, that's true. It was weird times.
I also did not beat Tinykin.
I will also own to having not beaten Tinykin. I played a good deal of Tinykin over the holidays, but I have not beaten it yet.
I made it into the 3rd level of Tinykin, and there are 6 levels. Let me get into a little bit of the description of those levels and how you get started. The story of Tinykin starts off with like a little astronaut, and there's this is almost identical to the story of Pikmin, by the way. Trouble in space, crash land on a planet. Turns out that planet is probably basically Earth, but maybe far in the future or something like that. In this case, you've crash landed on a planet, and you end up in a residential home that looks like it's from the 90s in terms of its tech and aesthetics. It is vastly out of scale with you, who are tiny, and it is populated by little teeny tiny bugs. So the whole aesthetic, to me, is perfect and charming. The whole world is, a chair or a table might have been turned into a building. Like, you see furniture made out of matchsticks. You see, the little towns and stuff that have sprung up, little warring factions of different kinds of bugs that have sprung up in different corners of the room, and that all of that is incredible. The look of the game has a really unique visual style that, for me, is rare and excellent. The room and all of the furniture and the level itself is all 3D. This is a 3D platformer, but all of the characters are beautiful hand-drawn cartoonish sprites that are kind of placed in 3 dimensions in a way that's really it's very well done. Like, many of the characters are drawn from different angles and things like that, but mostly, they're just like little cutouts kind of placed in the environment.
Yeah, Paper Mario style is what I thought of.
Yeah, that's a good touch point for that. And rarely have I seen that done as well, like merging those two styles as this. It has a really just smooth look to it. And, that's the problem with that in some cases is like, well, I'm going to be doing like 3D platforming. So how is my 2D character going to move in 3D space? Am I going to be able to land the jumps, stuff like that? Am I really going to know where I'm supposed to be standing? Sometimes you might expect like hitbox problems and things like that. I didn't really have any of that issue with Tinykin.
Yeah, I expected that to be worse too. Looking at it in screenshots, I thought like, well, like the character art looks charming, but it did seem a little... Initially, I was like, that's kind of odd having these very two-dimensional characters in this very well realized 3D spaces. But it immediately worked once it was in motion. Like, it just made sense. I never had any issues. And the 3D platforming, like I said, I'm usually kind of allergic to 3D platformers. I don't like them very much. I don't play modern 3D platformers very much. If I see something as a 3D platformer, especially one that involves collectibles, I'm usually not very interested. Like everybody, I played some during the 90s and early 2000s on, I think the last one that I remember like playing in that era was like, I was really into the Jack and Daxter games. The first one was a pretty straight up 3D platformer. But not a ton of those really. But this one mostly worked for me. And I did some thinking about this, and it really comes down to the settings for me. Like, what this game really did well, it has good level design. And the Pikmin mechanic, which we'll talk about a little bit more, it makes sense if you played Pikmin, but if you haven't, we'll explain it a little bit. But the main thing that I think pushed this over the edge for me in terms of working as a 3D platformer is just the fact that all of the settings are contained in these rooms. On a typical 3D platformer, there's this part of your brain you have to engage that's like about learning the 3D space and how different areas might connect to one another. And like, you might see something and try to have to figure out a way up to it or what have you, like that. And obviously like judging jumps and whatnot. But I always find myself turned around and lost in 3D platformers. The last time I had this experience really, really badly was that game from the like Heart Machine people that I really wanted to like and hated. What was it called? That incredibly like Dayglow thing from
Solar Ash. Like surfing around. Solar Ash. Yeah, I enjoyed Solar Ash, but I think I had the same issue as you. I can see how like having this
dreamscapes of like wild color that really threw me off. But like in this game, you're navigating around like a bedroom and you immediately start building a mental map of it with like your basic brain. Like, well, okay, I'm in a bedroom. Over there is a bed. Over there is a desk. Over there is a poster, and underneath the poster is a thing with a CD player on it. Like, that stuff just starts clicking into place in my brain in a way that like, it's going to be over the purple blob and behind the Tower of Bones never does. Like, for me, like this immediately had a mental map, every single room. And so even the ones that were a little weirder, like the level where it's like a bunch of terrariums, I was immediately like, okay, it's a room. It's got terrariums in it. I'm in this terrarium. I know the layout of the room immediately.
Did it also help that there was no combat in the game? Like, this is I think that it's easy to not get turned around in a space when there's nothing like forcing you to literally turn around.
That's true.
And the way that this treats those like collectibles in every corner also, I think, helps. There are these little blobs of glowing yellow pollen everywhere, and this isn't totally true for every surface in the game, but basically everywhere there's a lot of that stuff. And by looking and seeing where you have gotten it and where you haven't gotten it, and here's another place where like render distance really plays a part here. You can see the whole way across a lot of these places. Like you can tell where you've been and where you haven't by like, okay, I grabbed a bunch of that golden pollen over there, so I've definitely been over there. Another thing they do that I think is really smart is you're constantly because you're so small and you're like in these really tall spaces, using the verticality, you're constantly finding these little silkworm bug things that will drop like lines that you can either climb or like ride up and down on your bar of soap, which you ride around on adorably. And that unlocks easy ways to get back up to the high up places. And that is a really, really good thing, because being able to actually get up and survey the level and look and in a lot of cases pretty much see everything, really, really smart. One of my favorite levels was the second one where there's like a big, it was the one with the terrariums like you mentioned. And I think there's like a big potted plant that's kind of overgrowing its pot in the middle of the room, and climbing that makes it pretty easy to get to anywhere. You should mention the bar of soap and the bubble glider, and then of course the actual Tinykin. I want to talk about the powers in the game because they're very related to how you get around. Unfortunately, I've not played enough of this game to have gotten every color of Tinykin. I don't know if you did.
No, I played a little farther than you did, but I don't think I've I haven't finished it yet either.
I had like
this game, by the way, like in terms of length, it's actually not super long. It's about 6 hours. And I think I was just playing, or maybe 7 or 8 hours if you're playing a little more completionist. I was playing at a bit slower pace because I only played this with my daughter. And she didn't want me to play it without her, which is, fair enough. And she also had a lot of specific instructions about things she'd like me to go and do and look at. So I was playing at a little slower pace, and also only at times during the holidays when I could, boot up a game absent other responsibilities, which can be tricky. So I don't think either of us got all that far in it. I definitely played it for about 4 to 5 hours, I think. And I think I played through the first 4 levels, if I recall correctly. So if there are 6 levels, that makes about sense with what I kind of thought I'd experienced.
Yeah. It also helps that like these levels have a lot of little, I think I put in more time, but got less far. The levels have a lot of adorable little hidden places that you can unlock. Things like, opening a door to that leads into a cardboard box that's been converted into some sort of bug church, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And there's really charming characters to interact with everywhere. The Tinykin themselves, you're picking them up in different places. They're in these little eggs and you hatch them. There's the 3 that I was using. There's like a kind of a generic pink one. That's the basic. And the pink one is used to carry things around. They serve kind of a dual purpose of being like, you have to have a certain number of them to move things, which is often like how they gate progress to, move this big heavy thing out of the way. But then also they carry around inventory items for you. So they also kind of serve as an inventory. There's red ones, which you throw and they explode. And you can use those to kind of blast open areas. And then there's green ones, which can pile up into a tower stacking on top of each other to basically make a ladder, which is super useful, letting you reach higher places. There's also blue ones and one other that I don't think I have messed with yet. Anyway, the way that you kind of interact with these little guys has one big advantage over Pikmin, which is Pikmin is much more of like a puzzle game and a real-time strategy combat game where you're like marshaling the Pikmin to go and fight for you, stuff like that. The ones here in Tinykin, the Pikmin equivalents, first off, you don't have to choose the right color to do the thing. You just hit the button and it uses the right one. So if it's something you need to pick up, it does that. If it's something you need to blow up, it does that. If it's I think for the green ones I was using it, I can't remember what the control was exactly on that, but it's
I think
all
you can manually choose between the colors of Tinykin, but I don't think I ever actually had to.
Yeah, I don't think you really need to. It's really straightforward. It's just about like collecting them and having enough of them kind of following you around to progress through the different things you're trying to get through. And that works really well. It makes things very seamless, and it keeps you from having to like do the kind of micromanagement that you do in Pikmin. That's kind of the name of the game there. And then you can see they're all related to, a lot of the ones I was mentioning are related to unlocking new areas or getting past obstacles. I did want to bring up the movement abilities in this game, which I thought were really good. Like, it has your basic run and jump, but it has a glider that's basically a bubble, and you can kind of extend the time you can glide. And it has my favorite thing, which is the soap bar, which is basically a skateboard. You're moving around really big spaces, and so it really, really helps that you have something that kind of lets you like move really fast and slide around. And the feeling of sliding around on that bar of soap is really good. Like, you can really book it down slopes. Like, there was a banister that I had to slide down a few times. That's really good. And all of the places where you find that useful, including, like I mentioned before, those like silk strands that you can use to get up to higher places. Anytime I was cruising around on that bar of soap, felt just really cool.
I loved all of that stuff too. The movement mechanics in this, really great. I'm not sure how much else there is to say about Tinykin, considering neither of us has seen the ending of the game. We usually do try to at least get to the ending. This one was a bit of a special case, considering that it was something we were both playing with kids and over the holidays and whatnot. But this is a really fun game that surprised me. I put it on literally thinking like, I just need to pick something off of the GamePass list that won't involve people's body parts being torn off. And I ended up sticking with it and really enjoying it a lot. So I would definitely recommend Tinykin to folks. It's on a lot of platforms. So if you are looking to play it, it's on Steam, it's on Xbox, including Game Pass, and that includes the PC version as well. It's on PlayStation, and it's on Nintendo Switch. And there is a free demo for the Nintendo Switch, which is a nice plus if you aren't sure. So I would definitely recommend folks check this one out. And I loved it. And it's been a pretty quick episode, considering it's just the two of us and a pretty short game that we both liked, but didn't have a lengthy argument about or anything like that. So we've got some time for some What's Making Us Happy this week. And as it happens, I have a really, really relevant What's Making Us Happy this week on the theme of little tiny people in big spaces. This week, a couple of days ago, I discovered that a favorite science fiction author, Greg Egan, had a new book out called Scale. Shane, I know you've read some Greg Egan before, right?
Yeah, I have some. I've read a good bit of it. I think the first one I read, what was that? Permutation
I know the
City.
one,
And I think I put you onto that one. That was the first one I think both of us read. Great book.
Yeah, I've enjoyed a few of his books. The ones that spring to mind most are Permutation City and Diaspora. Greg Egan, if you haven't read any of his books before, is like he's like a very he's a very interesting character. He's a very big ideas sci-fi guy. He's been writing since the 90s. A lot of his stuff has like transhumanist themes, but the thing that really sets his work apart is that he's very, very interested in the speculative science behind his books. He's not just about like throwing out some clever ideas. It seems like he comes up with a clever scientific, conceit first and builds a narrative out from that. Permutation City is a I think it came out in 94, so it's a pretty early sort of transhumanist narrative about the idea of like uploading people's brains into computers, but it spins out from there into some really thought-provoking ideas about like the nature of reality and so on. And Diaspora, which I just read last year, I don't remember when that one came out. It's also not super new or anything, but it's a really, really great book. Also on the idea of like, well, what if human beings become computer people? But much more on a sort of a like grand time scale and about the idea of like, well, what does it look like on a millennia long time scale for human beings' consciousnesses to explore, the reaches of the universe? What does that look like? Great books. And then I saw that he had a new book out as of a couple of days ago. And the summary just made me laugh. Because this, first of all, it both didn't sound like a Greg Egan thing and did. Here's the summary that was on his. I saw this on. He's on Mastodon, and so I saw him post about this, and I started laughing because in some ways it sounds like a parody of a Greg Egan story. When electronics importer Kara Leon goes missing, private investigator Sam Murgerif is hired by her sister to investigate. Kara is 8 times taller than Sam, but evidence soon points to players much smaller than either of them. As Sam and his cross-scale colleagues pursue the case, it becomes apparent that Kara's disappearance is linked to the development of technology with the potential to reshape their whole society and radically alter the balance of power between the scales. So this is a world, this is a alternate universe where, because of particle physics, of course, because Greg Egan, people and all life exists at 7 different scales, all half size of the scale before. So there's scale 1 people who are regular size, and then there's scale 2, which is half of that size, scale 3, half of that size again. Sam is in the middle, and then the tiniest people at scale 7 are really, really little. And there's all sorts of interesting little scientific quirks about the differences between the scales. So, life, including single cellular life and everything, exists at all of the scales. But not everything does. So, for example, the people at scale 7, there's no... another important detail about this, because this is particle physics and not just like borrowers or whatever, all of the people at all of the scales have the same mass and roughly equivalent strength. So you might have a person who is like, 6 feet tall, and a person who is like, Ant-Man rules, almost invisible people that weigh the same as regular people. So, for example, they have to be really careful about where they step, because if they step on, if a scale 7 person steps on scale 1 dirt, they'll like sink into it like a person walking on stiletto heels or something. But also people at scale 7, they don't have metal, because metal doesn't scale down that far. So they have to like use bone knives and things like that, because, there's nothing stronger in the universe than scale 7 bones.
I love Greg Egan. He's so weird. He wrote a whole book about like a world where the speed of light was like slower than a bus. I can't remember if I'm remembering that right.
I think that was a short story, and I think I remember that one too, but now I can't remember what it was called. That one was good too.
I'd have to go back. He's done a lot of short. His writing works great in short stories, because he's really good at these like hyper speculative ideas.
Good stuff. I Scale is kind of it's a full length novel, but it's a little shorter than some of his others, like Permutation City. I started it yesterday morning, and I'm already like,
I've got to ask this one. How are the characters? Because that's his like Achilles heel, is writing.
It really is
sound that talk like real people.
They are not. They're Greg Egan characters, which is to say that like they're all little single note people whose job it is to discover the science that he has so cleverly arranged.
Yes.
But it's still good stuff. I'm still enjoying it quite a lot.
I'm really looking forward to reading this.
Yeah, and doing it as a mystery story, it was, I think, quite
that's
good
cool.
for his his thing, because like if your characters
all his stories are kind of a what if, like
and if your characters are little like paper thin puppets there to discover your writerly secrets, then it's having them be people involved in a missing persons case is actually great, because of course you're uncovering things constantly throughout. It's I think it's really fun and well done, and I'm enjoying it quite a lot. And it was very apropos, because playing through Tinykin, thinking about Tinykin, and then suddenly reading a book about little people, but not That's just fun. Like how fun would it be to be a little person who could climb up on top of a sofa as if it was a mountain. In this case, those people would sink right through that sofa, unless it was built for them. So interesting little sci-fi conceit. I would recommend checking out Scale. Greg Egan is a really, like I mentioned, he's kind of a weird character. He makes a point of keeping it such that no photos exist of him online. He's got some pretty, I think, interesting ideas about the and has for years about the future direction of AI that I think he is being proven more right every day. Maybe we should all try to limit our digital footprints on this world. And so, he has a website. He is on Mastodon. I was kind of surprised to see he was on Mastodon, frankly, because he's always seemed sort of like very private. But even there, he's
Mastodon's
not
pretty
posting
private
pictures of any kind. Yeah, that's true. So anyway, go to his website, which looks very 90s. And you'll find links to the book. It's print on demand via Amazon. I don't actually know what his publishing situation is, but you can just buy the book as like a Kindle, a Kindle book, or you can buy an Amazon print on demand, or you can buy it via Smashwords or whatever. I'm pretty sure he's basically just self-publishing these days, which
way to go, Greg.
Cool if it works for him. So yeah, check it out. Scale by Greg Egan. That's Egan.
The thing I want to say I'm just having a lot of fun with right now is popping up in a lot of the news and things like that. It's called ChatGPT. Raygan, have you messed around with this?
Yeah. Speaking of terrifying AI.
Yeah. I don't. After having spent a lot of time with it, I don't find it terrifying. I find it kind of exciting. But it is definitely kind of out there and feels extremely science fiction to me. I'm probably the wrong person to fully explain this in a blurb on a podcast. There's a lot to say about the topic, but ChatGPT is an application layer example of a AI model called GPT-3. That's an example of something called a transformer, or GPT is general purpose transformer, I believe. And basically what this app does is it predicts text. And, it's, if you were to give it a piece of text and say, hey, what comes next? It's going to be pretty good at giving a follow-up. And it does that by having been trained on a vast, vast amount of the world's writing available on the internet. And, it basically tries to emulate a kind of a conversational style and, and writing in general. So you can give it questions, you can engage it in dialogue, and it provides extremely, extremely human-like answers, much more so than any technology that I've used before.
I think people listening to this podcast have probably already heard about GPT or ChatGPT, or maybe even experienced it. But like, what are you doing with it? That like, I basically just sort of dicked around with it, doing some. I had it write a description of some magical items for like Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, write a description of a wizard's orb and tell me all of its its magical properties and powers in a fantasy setting, and it spat something out. And then you can. What's fun about it is that it's conversational, so you can ask it to do revisions, or you can ask it to make changes, or ask it for more details. So I said, that's cool, but now make it about Muppets. And it was like, the orb of fun is a magical item in the world of the Muppets. It was created by the great wizard Kermit, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, wow, it just transformed this D&D item description into a Muppet version. And it did it pretty convincing. So that kind of stuff was really fun to mess around with, but I haven't done anything like,
Absolutely. And that kind of is interesting, because that is something I've messed around with as well. It's really fun for coming up with things like children's bedtime stories, which I've done a few times.
I need to do that.
And my son loves to ask me for self-insert fanfic of his favorite media properties, which is the thing he always wants for a bedtime story. And sometimes I'll oblige, and ChatGPT takes a lot of the annoyance out of that. But the things that it is really good at, and that I'm actually finding it useful for, because it is, as a toy, it's excellent. It feels like, you can ask it to write anything. You can say, give me a short story where the characters from Transformers Beast Wars play Dungeons and Dragons with each other, right? And it will do that. It'll give you it'll tell you, Megatron is the dungeon master, and he does this and this, and Rat Trap plays a thief and stuff like that, right? So
I see we both went to Dungeons and Dragons uses for this thing.
Yeah, I mean it's fun. It's fun to get it to to give you fantasy stuff, right? Although that said, it does badly at one of the things I really wanted it to be good at, which is I told it, give me a list of fantasy dwarf names. I'm always needing fantasy character names, and it literally just gave me a list of that. They're all names right out of Lord of the Rings. Go figure, because it's plumbing all of this text, and it's like, well, here are some dwarf names. Yes, those are dwarf names, but I wanted original. I said original dwarf names, and it's like, well, how about Feely and Keely? And I'm like, not so much. I know those guys. What this tool really is good for is it's because it's interactive and you can go back and forth with it. It's extremely trainable. You can. Here's one example, right? I was trying to come up with examples of things that a particular job title does on a day-to-day basis. Not my job title, something that I needed to describe for work. This is something, there's a lot of text about this kind of thing on the internet, right? There are resumes, there are job descriptions, there are articles, right? And so when you have something like that, and you're able to ask it really good fact-based information about it. And most
you
of the
have to
time,
be careful with the fact-based.
You do have to be careful. You absolutely have to be careful, and you have to check its work because the term is hallucinate. ChatGPT can kind of hallucinate sometimes. It errs on the side of trying to provide you an answer, even when it might not be able to provide you with a quality answer, right? Mm-hmm. So
it's a bullshitter, basically.
It is a virtual bullshitter in many cases, but it's not intentionally a bullshitter. It is just an answer machine that will spit out an answer if you tell it to give you an answer. So you have to use it carefully. You have to check its work. And when you ask it questions, you have to ask it the right questions. You have to ask it questions that it could conceivably give you a real answer for, right? And it's been a big learning experience, learning to use this in a way that does return real answers, because you have to keep its limitations in mind. And so that's only come for me through using it a lot. I have this on my phone. I'm using it all the time because I just find it fun. But the fact that you can then go back to it and say, okay, take this list and take items 1 through 3 and turn each of those into a short descriptive paragraph, right? Easy, it can do that. Or you can give it 5 or 6 paragraphs of something that you copied from the internet and say, give me a summary of this, and then at the end, give me 3 bullet points, and then also give me a final bullet point that's a refutation or a critical statement. And it will do all of that. And I find that incredibly useful. It's like a conversation partner when you're brainstorming or thinking through things. You have to be careful with it. You can't put it in charge. You have to stay in charge, and you have to be the human being that's responsible. But when you are doing a research-based task, and you're particularly at that early brainstorming stage, or you're doing like some light formatting or rewriting, I have found it genuinely useful. And this is the kind of work that I did not foresee AI being genuinely useful for. So that's been really fun. A lot of cool, fun things to do with it. And I foresee actual, real, useful things to do with it. I'm starting to find them myself.
It doesn't fill you with dread that your entire job role will be automated away by the time you're
absolutely
40?
Not. I don't think that AI is going to replace people. I think people that use AI are going to replace people that don't.
Okay.
I think that it is. I mean, maybe I'm going on too long about this. This is a topic that I love to talk about. But if you look at the transportation space, right, there's a reason that human beings have not fully taken their hands off of the wheels of AI powered, self-driving cars yet. Right, the car will drive itself, but you have to keep your eyes on the road, and you are responsible for its driving. Right, and if your Tesla careens into a crowd, which it might, it is your job to hit the brakes, because you have judgment, you understand the real world. I do think there's this interesting possibility. We see this idea. This is a very Greg Egan conversation, actually. Maybe I would love to hear what he thinks about AI. But
he follow him on Mastodon.
Yeah, I guess I should. I will. We foresee this idea of general purpose artificial intelligence, the idea of a actual artificial consciousness, if you want to call it that, right? Something that can really think. And what does that really need? It needs to have like an understanding of the world. It needs to have the ability to reason and have essentially basic common sense, things like that. Well, I would never have thought we would approach that in the like sidelong fashion of predicting text. But in order to predict and output rational text that describes the world and makes sense, we have had to approach general purpose artificial intelligence in a very weird way. So I find this to be really interesting, like both as a sci-fi concept, and now today as an actual tool that I'm using every day.
That's weird and interesting and cool. And that's a good place for us to wrap it up for this week. So thank you, Shane, for joining me on this episode of The Short Game. I'm continuing to try and get things back on track. My entire life has been upended, continues to be upended by the new addition to our family. I know you've been hearing me say that for months now, but it is still, things are
it's
still
those first few months that are the most disruptive ones.
Yeah, man. My 3-month-old started daycare this week, and that's both freeing and also kind of terrifying. My wife has started back at work, and there's a whole lot of learning involved in getting 3 children out the door to daycare in the morning. Just 3 children of various ages and mobility and willingness to cooperate is a real adventure every single morning. So good times over here at the Kelly household. Thank you, listeners, for continuing to bear with us on some slight differences in our schedule. But I think it's been a good time, and I'm really eager to see what's coming out. We're looking at a really exciting 2023 full of games that are scheduled for release that I cannot wait to check out. So stick with us, and thank you for listening to The Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net. You can also find us on the socials. We're on Twitter @_shortgame, and we're on Mastodon @shortgame@zork.social.
I love that.
Thank you. Just set it up. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/theshortgame. If you can support the show at even just $1 a month, then you get instant access to our Discord, which is where we talk about games and the show. It's where we talk about episodes that have come out and are about to come out. It's where we plan things. It's just a good online hang if you need one of those. Everybody who supports the show at even just $1 a month gets access to that. And if you support at a higher level, I will send you some stickers. So we appreciate that. And all of our patrons, thank you, patrons. You can also find me on Mastodon at Raygan @bird.rodeo. And Shane, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at 8bitshane, and also on Mastodon at 8bitshane at mstdn.social. I might change that.
This is the problem with Mastodon.
I don't like that. I don't like that one because it's hard to say. Yeah, I didn't think the actual Mastodon.social was like full.
Yeah,
and then
that's a thing.
There's like off-brand Mastodon that's social. I was like, oh, that seems like a good backup. Now I have to explain that, so I'm going to switch over.
To spell it out every time. Yeah, that was what kept me away. Like, there's a really nice, if folks are looking for a place to join Mastodon, there's a really nice games-focused server called mstdn.games that I would recommend as a place to start. If you are not a podcaster who has to read the spelling of their Mastodon handle on the air every time. But if you're looking for like a games-focused place that seems chill and seems to be well moderated and run by people who aren't the worst kind of gamers, but instead seem to be pretty chill, I would check that place out, mstdn.games. But I did not put our show account there or my personal account there because I have to say the words mstdn.games every time. That would bug me. I like bird.rodeo. Anyway, you can find us on all of those places. Thank you, listeners, and thank you so much for listening to The Short Game.